Sometimes it helps as Christians to see Christianity when we look at other religions, and then they can become a mirror that helps us see ourselves.
Dynamic biblical discussions with special guests exploring tough biblical issues, academic scholarship, ethics, archaeology, textual criticism, Old Testament, New Testament, Bible interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Christian history, ancient Near East cultures. You're tuned in to Conversations with Pastor Cliff on Puluso Ministries.
Welcome everybody once again to another episode on Puluso Ministries on Conversations with Pastor Cliff. And today we have a lovely guest, and his name is Brian McLaren, and he's a theologian and an author. He has authored several books, and many of them I think they'll be very helpful for some of you to get your hands on. But today specifically we'll be focusing on his book that he wrote, and it's called Faith After Doubt: Why Your Beliefs Stopped Working and What to Do About It. So that's our topic for today. And welcome, Brian, onto Puluso Ministries on Conversations with Pastor Cliff.
Thank you so much, Pastor Cliff. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for taking this time. I know you and I are going to have a wonderful chat about this. I've been intrigued by some of your work, and I've been following you around, the globe, and checking out what you are doing and how can it be beneficial to some of our audience. Hence, we brought you onto our show. And perhaps for some of our audience who don't know who you are, can you give a sort of a brief background of who you are and what has inspired you to do the type of work that you are doing currently?
Sure. Well, first, I should say that I've had the chance to visit your beautiful country several times, and I just have loved every experience there. So great to be with you. I was born in New York State in the United States, but spent most of my life outside of Washington, D.C. I began my career as a college English teacher. I was interested in literature especially. But I was part of a group of people who started a little church, and that church grew, and I became the pastor and served there for 24 years. I had grown up in a very conservative Christian background, and through my own experiences and also my experiences as a pastor, I just came into deeper and deeper, inescapable awareness of how much was not working in the Christian faith as many of us inherited it, and how many of us were rethinking things on a somewhat superficial level, others of us on a very deep level. And so I started writing about those challenges and questions, and really became my next career. So for the last 15 years or so, I've been working as a writer and speaker.
Fantastic. I've been intrigued by your latest book, Faith After Doubt. And you mentioned these 4 stages of faith. And
yes,
for the benefit of our audience, what are these 4 stages of faith, and how do you sort of pragmatically navigate between the 4 of them? Yeah.
Yes. So, Pastor Cliff, I first should say I was originally exposed to stage theory when I was in college, and especially in graduate school. And then I became a college teacher, and I went to a professional development course at my university to basically help us understand young adults who were in university. And as I was being exposed to this information from the fields of psychology and social psychology, I felt this was one of the most helpful frameworks I'd ever been exposed to understand my own struggles as a Christian. And over the years, I read many different theorists. There are a whole range, some of them writing specifically in a Christian and theological framework, others in a psychological education, human development framework. And I tried to integrate their different theories because they all follow a similar flow. And so I summarized it in 4 stages that are very, very easy to remember. And I encourage people to think of these not as like cars on a train, but to think of them as rings of a tree. And so we all start with that inmost ring, which I call simplicity. Then some of us grow into a second ring, which I call complexity. Then some of us into a third ring that I would call perplexity. And then I think there's a fourth ring that I call harmony or solidarity. And if you live there long enough, I think that becomes your new simplicity. And then you might face complexity, perplexity, and so on. So if you think of these as a pattern or process that could repeat itself through our lives, I think that's a good way to think about it. I also should say that one of our huge challenges in the Christian faith is that there are many forms of Christianity that act as if the only way to be a Christian is in the realm of simplicity. And they think there's something wrong with you if you grow beyond that. And that's one of the reasons why this kind of stage theory, I think, can be really helpful to people.
Fantastic. I know in the modern day era, we have a lot of the term that is going around, deconstruction, and
Yes.
people are using the term quite a lot. As you mentioned, these stages that they're not sort of a binary or a link that you can move from 1 to 2 and 3 and so forth. How does then one deconstruct whatever stage that they may be in to find where they are and how to actually ascertain where they are and where they should be?
Yes. Well, the first thing I'd say is wherever you are, that's where you should be. There's not a better or worse here. Maybe you could think of it like this. You can't do calculus or advanced algebra unless you've learned adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing. And so many people, they live their whole lives and they never need anything more than adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. But then if you need more, then there's a whole lot more math available to you. And I think the same is true in the Christian faith. But here's the big problem. So many of our forms of Christianity, this wasn't always true, but it's been true for a long time. And especially, I think this is true of Western European Christianity that then exported itself around the world along with colonialism. It acted as if the only legitimate form was simplicity. And simplicity is oriented toward seeing the world in terms of two: us, them, in, out, good, bad, friend, enemy, familiar, unfamiliar, citizen, alien. And we love to divide the world racially, fits this as well, or class, upper class, lower class. We divide the world into twos. And we're very oriented toward authority figures because one of our orientations is us, them, in, out. We have our authority figures. They tell us what to think. Other people have their authority figures who tell them what to think. And when you're in stage one, in a Christian setting, your authority figures tell you this is the only way to think. And if you disagree, you're of the devil and you're wrong and you'll be kicked out. And so suddenly, if people begin to question what their authority figures tell them, they're faced with real punishments, by their community. And this can cause an awful lot of suffering, an awful lot of fear, and sadly, a lot of dishonesty, where people say things they don't really mean because there's a lot of pressure put on them to do so. And that, I think, is one of the reasons so many Christians are interested in learning about these four stages, because I think they know something isn't working when they're in that stage one ring and they're looking for permission and ideas that there's anything beyond it at all that still could be called Christian.
Yeah, I think you say something quite important, that they're looking for permission to sort of spread their horizons, because if you look at today's world, we have a lot of spiritual doubt, and a lot of this doubt would have come from different readings and different understanding of their faith stages, which they may not necessarily know at what stage they find themselves. So pragmatically, how would you describe these stages of faith, so that you can sort of broadly give someone an understanding of what stage 1, 2, and 3, and 4 would contain?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me give a real quick summary. I'll just give a couple of keywords and then we can fill in the details if we'd like. And obviously, people could find the book if they'd like to learn more. But stage one, simplicity. The key word is dualism. And the key another key word is authority figures. We need authority figures who tell us what's right, wrong, in, out, safe, dangerous, and so on. And our job is to believe them. And if we question them, if we disagree with them, then we're in a lot of trouble. And a lot of people stay there their whole lives. But more and more people, I think, at a younger and younger age, for reasons we could discuss, find themselves uncomfortable in stage one, and they feel they're outgrowing it. They move to stage two, which I call complexity. If a keyword for complexity is pragmatism. What happens in complexity is you say, you know what? Life isn't that simple. I remember my first challenges to my simplicity faith came from other Christians. I grew up in a denomination that was very against anything charismatic or Pentecostal. Then I met charismatics and Pentecostals, and they seemed like good people. And suddenly I'm faced, my group said they're bad, but I experienced them as good. Who am I to believe? Of course, then I'd get around the Pentecostals and they'd tell me that the people from my denomination were bad. And I thought, well, it's not that simple either. And so I was pushed beyond stage one to say, how am I going to get along with all these different people who disagree? So instead of easy answers now, I need techniques, I need skills, I need pragmatic know-how to deal with different people who disagree. And not only that, in complexity, I want to understand, why do Pentecostals see it this way and non-Pentecostals see it that way and Catholics see it that way? And eventually I might say, and why do atheists see it this way? And why do Muslims see it this way? And suddenly I'm interested in the stories behind the beliefs and behaviors that I observe. And so stage two is a stage of curiosity, where you feel you've been given permission to ask a lot more questions and explore a lot more possibilities. Your authority figures stop telling you what to think, and the authority figures you're looking for are the kind who help you learn how to think. And I'll just tell you, Cliff, we're just meeting for the first time, but I'm going to guess that a whole lot of listeners to your podcast are people who are interested in a podcast like yours and interested in you as a host and leader, because you're inviting them to think and you're not insulting them or threatening them with hell or telling them they're of the devil if they think of in some different way. And that's stage two. I think some people can stay in stage two the rest of their lives and be very happy, but more and more people eventually, I think, start saying, you know, all of these people who say they're sure and say they're right, they've got some skeletons in their closet. And what I've learned in stage two helps me realize that it's not just that they all have different opinions, it's that some of their opinions really hurt people. And now in stage three, I call perplexity. And now we become very concerned about justice, integrity. And we feel the need, when people are saying how sure they are of themselves, to sometimes say, actually, I used to see it that way. I no longer do. And now they feel they don't fit in with those stage one and stage two communities because there's so much that's being said that they just think is harmful or false. And you could say this is the stage of skepticism or relativism. And a lot of people stay there their whole lives. When people say deconstruct, they could mean one of two things. They could mean they're deconstructing simplicity to move into complexity, or they're deconstructing complexity to move into stage three, perplexity. And very often, though, perplexity is what people mean when they say deconstructing. And a lot of people have never met another Christian who's in stage three, and so they feel very alone. And many people in stage three have never met a Christian who we might say is even beyond where they are in stage four in harmony. And I would define harmony or solidarity as the stage when we look back on the earlier stages, and instead of hating those people or judging them or only wanting to defeat and humiliate and distance ourselves from them, we realize, you know what? They're our neighbors too. And there's a story of why they think the way they do. I used to think that way. I should have at least as much compassion on them for being where they are as where I am. And now I have to learn how to live in this different place with a spirit of love in my heart. And I think that sense of that love is the most important thing. That's what tends to mark people who are in that stage 4.
Awesome, Brian. I like how you sort of summarize these stages. And there's something that strikes me, because when I went to a graduate school to study theology, I met a lot of challenges because I sort of realized that a lot of things that I had held dear from a church's perspective were now different. I mean, you learn that actually Moses may not have written the first 5 books of the Bible, what you grew up hearing from these authority figures that would have taught me to believe that kind of thing. And now I find myself perhaps moving to stage 2, where I start to question these things, but there are no simple answers, where you find that a lot of church figures try to put you into this neat boxes that are clearly cut to say this is right, this is wrong, this is hell, this is heaven, that type of thing. So I think that for me was an experience as we talk about it right now, and I think it may be some of the experiences that some of our listeners are actually encountering at this point in time. Yeah. But now, what am I asking you then is that why does fundamentalist Christians tend to be stuck in stage 1 than move to stage 2 easily?
Yes. Well, first, I think we should say sometimes it helps as Christians to see Christianity when we look at other religions, and then they can become a mirror that helps us see ourselves. And the fact is, there is stage 1 Christianity, there's stage 1 Islam, there's stage 1 Judaism, there's stage 1 Hinduism or Buddhism. And I think we see these stages reflected in all of these religions. And one of the things I would say is that when people are under stress, they're very often attracted to very confident authoritarian leaders who relieve their stress by telling them with great confidence, we're the good guys, we are right, we're on God's side, they're the bad guys, they're the enemy. And when a leader creates that kind of environment, it creates a lot of security for the members. They know who they are, they know who we are, the world is simple. And even though it might mean that they're in a lot of conflict with the bad guys, when they're with the good guys, they feel completely safe and fortunate and blessed. And so there's a lot of comfort that comes from this. Unfortunately, when you start asking questions, very seldom will a stage 1 pastor say, good for you, you're growing, you're asking questions, this is a sign of spiritual maturity. They'll say, you're being influenced by the world, you're becoming liberal, the devil has gotten into you. And so they warn you because that's the categories that their authority figures told them. And when we realize that these stage 1 expressions of Christianity have hundreds of years of momentum behind them, I think that helps us understand some of the problems. I also should say, I say this because I've been in stage 3 I was in stage 3 for decades of my life, and it's part of me today. People make a lot of money through this. Pastors can say, if you give your 10% to the church, God will bless you with 100%. Yeah. Well, nobody keeps track of whether the people got the 100%. But the pastor sure got something. And so this becomes almost like a business that becomes self-reinforcing. And it creates, frankly, it creates a lot of pain. It creates a lot of harm. And that's the kind of thing that stage 3 people become very sensitive to. And it's why it becomes very hard for them ever to go back,
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za.
Yeah, in your view, Brian, we find a lot of people that make this transition. And in your experience, what is the trigger or the trigger moment that tricks someone to move to from stage 1, let's say, to stage 2?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's something happens to the authority figure that they trust. So this authority figure, this pastor, he's a nice guy. He preaches. He's joyful. He's loving on the pulpit. And then you go to him and you say, Pastor, I'm not sure about something. And then he yells at you. And then when you say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you angry. And then he gets angrier. And you think, this pastor has a problem of rage. Or I think about an African pastor, a friend of mine from Kenya, and his sister committed suicide. And at the church, the pastor said that that the devil did this to her. Well, he knew that his sister struggled with depression. She always had. But the pastor said there's no such thing as depression. If she would just believe the word of God, she wouldn't be depressed. So now the family lost their sister, and the pastor is blaming the sister. It's all her fault that she didn't have enough faith. And they felt they could never go back to that church. So that experience of suffering and dishonesty, very often it relates to something that a pastor does. Sometimes it's just life. There are just many, many examples of this, but someone is taught that if they pray, in the right way, they'll get answers and everything will go well for them. And they're quote Bible verses to prove this. And they do everything they're supposed to do, and things go terrible for them. They get sick or something.
Yeah.
And they just think that doesn't work anymore. I've lost confidence that life is that simple, and that means you're leaving simplicity.
Yeah, I think that's well put, Brian, because many of our listeners, I think, find themselves in these different stages where either it could be 4 or 1 or even 3. But now I want to ask you, what are some of the potential dangers of being stuck, say, in stage 3 of perplexity that can create to a person?
Yes. Well, so in stage 3, you're sure what you're against, but you might not be sure what you're for. And anytime you're for something, you find you can criticize yourself for being for it because nothing is perfect enough. And so very often your honest questions lead to a kind of cynicism. And that cynicism can make life feel meaningless and make you feel paralyzed to get on with life. And it's very hard for you to be committed to something because you can always find out what's wrong with it. And what this leads a lot of people to just feel that they're stuck. I'll tell you another place where people feel this. They maybe go through stage 3 as young adults. Very often graduate school is what introduces people to stage 3. And when they bring that to their faith, then they have children a few years later, and they think, what am I going to teach my children? And suddenly, teaching their children only skepticism, teaching the children only critical thinking, doesn't feel like it gives them a kind of moral framework to live by. And they feel, I don't want to teach my children the way I was taught. I don't want to teach them the stage 1 Christianity I live in, but I don't want to give up either. And so the challenges of life evoke from them a desire to find something beyond. Maybe I could give one other quick example. Very often in stage 3, you become concerned about injustice because this is part of perplexity when you challenge and question the inherited systems and institutions and assumptions of your religion or culture or both. And when you are confronting injustice and you find yourself becoming hateful, you think, if I'm trying to fight hate with hate, this isn't going to work. And the way I say it sometimes is you turn your skepticism and cynicism on yourself. You become cynical about your own cynicism and skeptical about your own skepticism. And you begin to deconstruct your own deconstruction. Yeah. And when you reach that point, it makes you think, I've got to find out what I'm for, and I've got to live. I can't go back to stage one, but I have to find a code or a goal or a vision that I want to live into. And that, I think, opens you to a space of harmony.
Awesome. Brian, you mentioned something quite important in your answer there about children. How do we navigate children from these stages of faith? I know I'm a parent myself. I have my son. Sometimes he comes back from school and he says, but my teacher says, and I say, but this is how you got to think. And how, sometimes I find myself caught between a rock and a hard place, because I don't want to say something and he goes back to school and he says, no, my dad says, that type of thing.
Yes.
And how do I, how do we move between the two and move our children to a point where they don't get stuck, but they can be sort of critical, but at the same time have that sort of backing that can
Yes.
shape them to be morally, citizens as well.
Yes.
How would you do that?
Well, your question, Cliff, reminds me of a saying of a friend of mine. He said, for 10 or 12 years, parents raise their children, and then for the rest of their lives, the children raise the parents. Meaning, let's say you're at stage 2 as a parent, and you raise your child to be at stage 2, but your child is ready to grow beyond where you are. At that point, you make a decision. You start criticizing your child, or you lose touch with your child, or you say, I need to keep growing with my child, you see? And I think that's a healthy thing. So much we could say about this, but you might remember in the Gospels, Jesus said, don't think that I came to bring peace, but a sword, which is a very strange phrase. And it's obvious he's not advocating violence, because what he says next is, a person's enemies will be in his own household. And then this is a passage that never made any sense to me until after I was thinking about these stages. He says, I have come to set a son against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. In other words, he says, I've come to set the younger generation against the older generation. Now, he doesn't mean that they hate them, but he means the younger generation is going to end up disagreeing with the older generation. He also used the image of the new wine and the old wine. And so this to me is a great opportunity for parents to say, I'm going to have to grow in this process of raising my children. Maybe one other thing I could say is that imagine this, a parent in simplicity who's raising a child in simplicity will raise them in one way. But if the parent is in complexity, he'll raise his child through simplicity, knowing that there's something beyond simplicity. And then imagine a parent in perplexity. That parent will raise the child through each of the earlier stages, in a sense saying there's something beyond this. So I'll give you one simple example. All of us who have children, our children come home saying naughty words or saying things we don't want them to say that they pick up from other children or they see on a movie. And so in stage 1, children are very geared towards saying, this is a good word, this is a bad word. But then you might say to your children, listen, to say a bad word, to say a word that we call a bad word, it's just a word. The reason we don't want to use that word is because what really matters to us is to be loving people. And if you use a word that hurts someone, that's not a loving thing to do. So now we go beneath the rule and beneath the simplicity of good, bad, right, wrong, and we give the reason or the purpose. And from a stage 4 perspective, we'd say, love is the highest goal, and we don't want to do things that are unloving to people. And then I think it would be very appropriate for a parent to say, and you've seen me at times when I'm in a bad mood and I say and do things I shouldn't. So none of us are perfect, and we have to be gracious to each other. But our goal is to be loving people. And that's how I'm living, and I hope it's how you'll live too. So now we're introducing our children to more spacious ways of thinking about life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Brian, what jumps to mind as I'm having this conversation with you is that I have a lot of friends that are maybe in the pastoring field that may have shifted in terms of their stages, in terms of how they used to believe, perhaps before they went to a seminary or even a graduate school, and but they still in the church, but you find that they are afraid to say some of the things that they think may get them into trouble. And how does one sort of be reassured and also be able to be free and not to voice out what you think? Maybe you're too scared to shake the boat. And how does one find balance with that their modern knowledge and understanding?
Yes, Cliff, my goodness, this is one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? And because I was a pastor for 24 years, I'm very empathetic to this challenge. One of my dear friends said to me, every pastor has an unwritten job description, and that job description is keep the people happy. But here's the problem. Happy people don't grow. Happy people are complacent. And to invite people to grow means introducing discomfort. So if you want people to grow, you have to introduce discomfort. And learning how to graciously introduce discomfort is one of the skills that I think not too many of us were taught. Sometimes we observe it. And it's easy to observe it in Jesus. So Jesus goes around, and what does he do? He doesn't just give lectures, tell people this is good, this is bad, these are the good guys, those are the bad guys, love these people, hate these people. He doesn't do that. He goes and says to people, there once was a man who had 2 sons. And then he tells a story. The story is way more complex than simplicity. And so the story challenges them to think in ways beyond where they're currently thinking. It invites them into a new way of thinking. And he never explains it to the crowds. You have to come and ask him in private, what did you mean by that parable about the guy who was sowing seed in different areas? And then he explains it. And now they learn how to think in this bigger way themselves. But what I think pastors, maybe a simple skill pastors can learn is the skill of doing something like this. Let's say I was preaching on Genesis chapter 1, the 6 days of creation. I might say something like this. Now, brothers and sisters, some of you believe this has to be taken literally, that we have to believe that there were 6 literal 24-hour days. That's what I was taught. That's what I used to believe. If you believe that, I love you and I respect you. And you can keep believing that as long as you think you need to. But many of us have changed our mind and see this differently now. And now we think, no, this isn't scientific language. This is the language of poetry. And whether you take it literally or you take it poetically, metaphorically, however you take it, let's look at the meaning that we can agree on. And one of the things that's clear is God's creation is good. God says good, 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 one time after another. And what does it mean for us, whether you take this story literally or not, to take it very seriously that the creation is good? And now what we do is we shift the focus from stage 1 arguments to bigger ways of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've sort of adopted in recent time. I was talking about my son earlier on. He asked me, how do you deal with this? So I don't read the text maybe literally, but I look for meaning in the text that we may be reading instead of looking for these neatly cut answers that we can find in the Bible. And I tell him that there are no simple answers in the Bible, but when you have to dig deeper and see what does it mean for yourself and what does it mean for the bigger community at large. So I think that's a more of a healthier way of reading scripture than just looking for these neatly cut answers. Now, to my question now, Brian, is that how does then one move from, if you've been at a stage of doubt and cynicism, how do you get back to faith and how do you get back faith?
So I think a big challenge here is exactly what you just said, Pastor Cliff, and that is that we stop being obsessed with facts and we start being interested in meaning. What is the meaning that I'm looking for? Now, I think faith ends up meaning more to us when we move into stage 4, but it's a different kind of faith. instead of being faith that I'm right and that our group is right and our authority figures are right, it's faith to say, I believe in love. In fact, to quote the Apostle Paul, I believe that faith, hope, and love are the most important things. And the greatest of those things is love. And so I really am focused toward love. And to say that I believe in love, that I believe that God is love, that I believe that the primary message of Jesus was love, when I realized that the whole movement of the Bible goes from law to wisdom to love. In fact, if I were to put it in 4 stages, it goes from law to wisdom to justice to love. The law is simplicity. Yeah. Wisdom is complexity. Justice is perplexity, and love. And those things aren't exclusive. It's that love is the biggest whole that holds them all together. And when we're ready to say, I'm not giving up and saying life is meaningless. I'm not throwing everything out and saying we're just a bunch of protoplasm on this hunk of rock spinning in a meaningless universe, but to say, no, I actually believe that the purpose of my life is to live in love and to live seeking justice and to live with wisdom and working from a core of right and wrong. Now we've integrated those 4 stages, and I think faith is far more mature than it was before.
And perhaps as our last question, Brian, now you mentioned love as this overarching theme, if I would call it that, or maybe the ultimate goal that we want to all get into. How do we make it an agenda that drives us in a particular community that one may find themselves, to make love the priority in terms of how we read the text, in terms of how we communicate our faith? How do we do that? Do you have any specific ideas to do that?
Yes. So, Cliff, this is such a good question. And one of our problems, as I said before, is that the old ways of reading the Bible and the old ways of understanding Christian faith have a huge amount of momentum. And so we're just in the early stages of finding new and better ways to read the text and to interpret it. But here's the great thing. Once a few of us start doing it, then others say, oh, I got to do that. So could I give you a quick example?
Of course, yes. Yeah.
A friend of mine just preached a sermon recently on the book of Ruth. And she was especially focused on that very famous verse in the book of Ruth, where Ruth, the Moabite woman, says to her mother-in-law after both of their husbands have died, wherever you go, I will go, your people will be my people. And so what this pastor did is she said, she actually gave 4 different ways of reading the text. She gave the traditional way that was basically saying the Jewish people were right and the Moabites were wrong. And so now this Moabite has been converted to join the right people. That's a stage 1 way of reading the text. And she said, but feminists read this and they think, let's have empathy for Ruth and her mother-in-law. Because they lived in a world where men ran everything and women were totally dependent on men. And here we have a story of when the men die, the women bond together to find a way to survive. So now we're made, it's not just, in fact, we've lost that whole idea of there's one good people and everybody else is rejected by God. Now it's, let's look at the struggles and suffering of people. And then a Black theologian said, let's realize that this is the process of colonization, that Moabites were seen as inferior. They were marginalized by the mother-in-law's people. And so here what we have is in a colonizing structure of injustice and oppression, we have a woman trying to make her way and what she's forced to do just to survive. Let's use that to look at how people are struggling to survive and are marginalized in our context. Another great way of reading the text. Anyhow, we could go on and give other examples, but what this pastor did is gave 4 different readings of the text in a sermon and then said to people, so you have these different options of reading the text, and I hope you'll think about its meaning and bring all 4 of these ways of reading the text and just sit with them in the week to come. And we can talk about it next time we're together. So she invited everyone to become theologians and interpreters and engage with the text. I think it was a beautiful example. Once you see that, you start reading other passages of the Bible, you think, oh, that same thing's going on here, that same thing's going on here. So those would be, that would just be one very practical example.
Oh, thank you. That is fantastic, Brian. I actually like that. I think this is all we have time for today. I've thoroughly enjoyed having a word with you. It's been refreshing, and I hope all our listeners at home have certainly enjoyed listening to you and your wisdom and what you cover in your book. And I know you say a lot more in your book, and I think it would be best for them to go and get their hands on your book. And how can they do that? Do you have any online presence, or where can they purchase your book?
Well, first, if people are interested in my work, it's just brianmclaren.net, BrianMclaren.net. And there'll be all kinds of links there. And ordering the book will depend on what country you're in, but any online bookseller should be able to get it. It's published by St. Martin's Press in the United States and by Faith Words and Hodder and Stoughton in much of the rest of the world.
Thank you, Brian. And is there anything in the background that you're working on to publish perhaps in the near future?
So the sequel to this book that I'm just finished literally this week, that will come out in May, is called Do I Stay Christian? Because beyond the question of doubt, I think there are so many people who are just struggling with the whole idea of Christian identity. So this is a book to help people grapple with that question. And that will be out at the end of May.
Fantastic. I look forward to it. Perhaps we could have a word about it in the near future.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
So
that would be great.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you, Brian, for your time. And it's been great having a chat with you. And certainly hope our viewers at home have enjoyed this. Until next time, we look forward to seeing you, and stay tuned, and God bless.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Puluso Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Puluso, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za.